Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for these times. In this week's episode, we continue our conversation with Hitomi Oba, who we spoke to in December 2023. The kid's life is enhanced by having parents who do other things. I don't think it's necessarily great for a kid to be they want to feel focused on. They have to feel like they're the center of your life. There's no question that helps them be balanced as their ego develops. And yet at the same time, if one has nothing else to focus on as the adult, that can become problematic too. So.
Absolutely. And for them to see that you have other focuses and other pillars in your life. Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I think, we're like when we talk about representation, it's like representation wise, like I'm the person they see the most.
That's right. That's right.
So it's like, yeah. No, I've been thinking about too. It's been tricky. Like I had a number of nights recently where I was out every night, so I was not there for bedtime, and the younger one was starting to get a little bit, clingy to mommy during the day. Yeah, definitely. We're starting to see that. I'd also been out of town prior to that, quite a bit recently. Right. So they were starting to get a little bit like a little more clingy, and just, mommy, really wanting mommy. But at the same time, like my older one who's starting to understand things more, she'd be like, oh, mommy, like I saw your video, you're playing saxophone, and then she's like, she'll recognize saxophone, maybe, she'll tell her teachers like, mommy is a concert, like, so cool. And so like she's starting to get that, like, there's a world outside of our house, too. And so I'm hoping as they get older, they'll see that more.
Have you found that it has affected the topics that interest you as a composer or as a performer, the pieces you pick up, what you do in your music making, as opposed to just making you feel desperately good at time management?
That is such a great question. That's such a great question. Yeah, I've been thinking about this more as well. Part of it's like cognitively, like, like philosophically, like what does this mean? Especially when I'm writing music, because that's where the more like the extra musical ideas come into play. But I think so, like even more at a like more instinctive emotional level, like for instance, improvisation wise, I was talking like being more centered and, my values and priorities becoming a little more solidified. I think that's given me a lot of center, just like in terms of musical, what is it? It's not confidence. It's like musical stability a little bit more too. So I think I was, like if there were inhibitions, like maybe mental inhibitions or emotional inhibitions that might have been there before, I feel a little bit stronger now and a little bit more centered to be like, oh yeah, those like really don't matter, even if I knew them beforehand, even if I recognized them beforehand, before I had kids in my head, it was still like it was still very difficult to kind of like shoo them away,
push through.
But now I feel like because I have a stronger center in my priorities, I've had to reevaluate them so many times, and just like what's important is a lot clearer to me now, in terms of like being a person on this earth. I think it translates to being a lot more sure in terms of my musical,
inspiration.
I guess mostly creation, and especially for improvising, I think, but also for composing, as a performer. Yeah, I think it mostly translates to like creating. So, improvising, composing.
The ability to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's now in your life. And that ability to play is a big part of improvising, just kind of chasing an idea and seeing.
Absolutely.
The curiosity of seeing where it might lead.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was going to say, I was thinking about this as well. Curiosity is so big. We talk about like, our job is to be imaginative, and for imagination, we need curiosity. So I think like, I keep thinking of the word like wonder, since having kids, and there's just like so much more wonder in this, in my space now, so much more wonder. Yeah, and just like unbridled wonder, and like seeing these people act on it so impulsively all the time is like very inspiring as well, So people whose job it is to be creative and to be imaginative, like I think being around young children all the time is a huge source of inspiration.
wonder is a very cool word because we wonder,
Right.
and at the same time, something is a wonder. It has that curiosity and amazement all in one,
Right. And then the wonderful, which is just kind of like a very positive,
right?
yeah, awe-inspiring word. Yeah.
We could talk about this forever, as far as I'm concerned.
It's funny though, when I was pregnant, I was trying to find as many sources as possible about musician parents,
Yes.
obviously trying to ask whoever I knew, but also there was a podcast called Midnight Lightning. I don't remember,
Mm.
something like that, where this woman interviews a bunch of professional musicians who are also moms.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, a lot of them were in the pop music sphere.
Yeah.
But it was still like I was, grasping at
You were
everything I
glued
could get.
to it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I've been trying to share my experiences more with younger people who are, thinking of having children. So
That's so
yeah.
great. Could you talk about fusing composition and performance? Does integrating improvisation into your compositions play a part in this? When you include space for improvisation in your works, how much freedom do you give your performers?
Yeah, that's a great question too, and it's something that I'm trying to face all the time and from different facets. So I feel like this is going to be an ongoing topic, as long as I'm making music, and for
Right.
a lot of fellow improviser performers as well. So maybe the past like 10 years or so, I've been trying to examine, experiment with these two facets and how they relate with each other more than I used to. Before, it was kind of just like try to do this, try
Right.
to improvise and try to compose. But now I feel like I have a little bit more of a, I'm able to step back a little bit and think about how they relate to each other a little bit more. And so, this might be in terms of like how one feeds another. It might be how maybe one medium might extend the ideas and visions of another, using it as an enhancer, or, trying to send it on a different trajectory. Um, so I think in particular, obviously I think about composition and improvisation all the time because, as a lot of people say, it's spontaneous composition. So a lot of the things I learn about or gain insight from composition, trying to apply to improvisation as well. But going the other direction is what I've kind of been trying to apply more consciously, improvisation into my pre-composed, music.
Right.
And I think one of the larger focuses has been trying to integrate things that are unique to my improvisatory language, in particular, like motion, pacing, momentum, all these things
Hmm.
that have to do with time, moving through time.
Hmm.
Because I think I was not approaching pre-composed music in the same way I was approaching time, how
Hmm.
things move through time in improvisation. Because in improvisation, I was very aware of time and pacing, and how things would unravel, as I went forward in time. So, yeah, momentum, ebb and flow, how gestures move through space and time. They're the things I've been trying to see if I can translate more into pre-composed music now. So,
Fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, in some cases I might just think about, like imagine it. In some cases I've literally like transcribed certain, the timings of things of my improvisations to see how, how it was manifesting and how that might apply.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, so that's been exciting, and there are a lot of ways to approach it for sure. So I think there are still so many ways to integrate that. Um, I've also, been interested in incorporating like indeterminacy, aleatory,
Hmm. Hmm.
improvisation into my pre-composed music, and that how I do that really depends on the players and collaborators with whom I'm working with, and what the desired result or the purpose might be. I feel like there are so many situations where the musical result can benefit from some degree of indeterminacy, so not just a conceptual or like practical thing, but also like in terms of the result, it might enhance it greatly, right?
Hmm.
So even if it's not straight up like improvisation, where the player is contributing most of it, it can be in so many various degrees, and I know a lot of people are experimenting with this. So yeah, I've been experimenting with parameters. It's nice having students who are open to experimenting as well. They're open to a lot of my improv games and and such.
AKA
So
guinea pigs.
guinea pigs, very willing and enthusiastic guinea pigs. So yeah, just like to what degree, how do I communicate these parameters? How do I elicit certain responses? So this has been kind of exciting thing. Experimenting also with like obviously the verbal portion, verbal element of that. How do I use words to try to elicit different kinds of responses, and some visual representations as well to try to experiment with, and how people respond based on their training and background is very different as well, right? So
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
with whom does what work, is always a big question. But I feel like a lot of the situations I'm in have been conducive to collaboration. So getting to know who you're writing for, right, in the new music world and in the jazz world as well, seems to be more and more a priority, right? So it's not just that you're writing a string trio, but you're writing for specific players who are going to premiere it. So that is such a rich, place to play with these kinds of ideas, I think. So it's an ongoing experimentation, but I think more and more people are open to it, it seems like, as well, in both the, heavily improvisatory field, but also in the more heavily pre-notated field of players. So it's an ongoing process for me.
Yeah, it kind of goes in waves, the interest in aleatory and
Right.
chance, if you want to put it,
Yeah.
in classical music. There are definite waves in it. Do you find any specific things or backgrounds or anything are more successful than others, or is it really just kind of random?
Again, it depends on the players, because I might say like, some of the jazz trained people in some cases are, might struggle to engage with non-traditional forms of improvisation, in some cases, right? So
Wow.
I think it really depends on the players, for me to say, all right, this is, a cell of material, and then I want you to, do this in this kind of way, might be very challenging for some people, right? And it might take some like training to kind of break down their defaults or preconceived notions about what improvisation is, for instance. So it's not necessarily that it's really hard to say. It depends on I can't break it down by genre necessarily, or even age, or generation. It seems like, you mentioned it comes in waves. So some people might have engaged with it more in the past, for some people it might be. But in general, if I can, I've been lucky to be able to collaborate with people who are open at least to trying it, and undaunted if they don't get it at first. I've faced frustrations with some students, in some occasions, but the luxury there is that we have a long period of time to work over it, right?
Right,
So
'cause you're an academic.
you're an academic, so a quarter is a very long time. So that's been illuminating for me too, right? In terms of like, oh, if someone's coming from this kind of mental training, then how can we kind of introduce these other ideas and such?
Right. Thank you for listening to For Good Measure, and a special thank you to our guest Hitomi Oba for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button, and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measure is produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times, and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to co-producer and audio engineer Stephanie M. Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts, and tune in next week for Good Measure.